couple key things to this graph that we talked about last time. What's this? The potential. So this was the potential amount of output. So thinking back to the production possibilities, what does the L stand for? Long run. So in the long run, what would the supply of goods and services look like? And we're saying, hey, over the long haul, we can only do so much. We can only produce so much. That is our potential level of output. We're going to be somewhere. We could dream of being here, but we can't be there. There's real constraints on the economy given our resource base. We've got a certain bucket of resources, and we can only do what we can do. So that's an important anchoring spot. So as we think about the shifters, you can see where this is going to bring us. If I call this PL1, and I'll use this a lot just to keep kind of some math concepts a little more simple. I'm just going to assume that the price level is at 100. It could be 97, it could be 110, it could be 214. It is what it is, but I'm just going to arbitrarily start us off at 100. And so the fun's going to happen when things change. And that's where these shifters come into play. And certain things are going to cause economic growth in the form of real GDP, and may as well also cause increases in the price level, which is ultimately inflation. So that kind of sets the stage for these aggregate demand shifters. Last time, I tried to make a connection for you between the players. And so I think one of the last things I left you with was to think about the demand having its four components like we were used to looking at with the expenditure approach to measuring real GDP. With the expenditure approach, we're simply categorizing consumers and households here, investment by businesses in capital, machinery, and equipment, government purchases of weapons of mass destruction and other things, toilet paper for the White House, and net exports, the difference between what we sell to the rest of the world and what they buy from us. Okay, because that then sets up the shifters. So shifter number one comes to us via the consumption route. Now, the shifter is really consumption through taxes. Changing tax rates, which if you just about listen to any news on the economy, just about any day of the week, you'll probably catch something on the battle going on. Republicans think we should drop tax rates. Democrats think we should raise them or keep them constant. And then it's this battle of, what are we talking about, G or T? Well, G and T are both fiscal policy instruments. So fiscal policy in general is government changes to G and or T. So when we talk about T, we've got a big T and a little t. Tax revenue collected, so kind of like the total tax revenue collected, comes to us from an income tax of little t times our gross income. We did this equation before, back in, I don't remember, a while back. And we're going to keep working on it the rest of the semester, so that's why a little repetition here, bringing back. So from a formula standpoint, the amount of tax revenue that the government collects from income is simply a tax rate times the amount of income. Is everybody clear on that? Okay, so the fiscal policy change here can be a change in the tax rate. So double recall number 2, recall 2, was disposable income. What was disposable income? How would you word that? Let me see who's alive in the back half of the room here. Disposable income. Let's take a stab. Eric, give me a number between 5 and 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Riley, what do you got for disposable income?
I don't know, extra money or like extra income that you have left over that you can spend on anything.
Okay, good. Leftover after what? Somebody add some words in for Riley. You're right. It's disposable, so it's like it's left over from something left after taxes, right? So disposable income was income after taxes. So the equation that we could use for this is simply my gross income minus my taxes that I got to pay for the government, which was based off of my gross income. So, in other words, that could look like this: y minus big T, income after taxes. I want to sneak in one other little innovation from this formula. Algebra people, what can I do with this sucker when I got a y here minus a ty? Factor out that y, right? So I can re-express this. I'm going to put the y at the end, but right? Legitimate? 1 minus t equals, or times y gives me my disposable income too. Now let's just throw in some percentages. If the taxes were 20%, I get to keep 80%, right? So it flows pretty nicely for us. So it's just like 1 minus 0.2 equals 0.8, which is really 80%. 80% of my money is my take-home pay that I get to go spend on whatever I want, right? So disposable income. All right, well, what did I spend my disposable income on? Consumption or savings. So we're going to separate my disposable income into consumption and savings. We're going to ignore the rest of the world. I could be, it's kind of combined into here. I mean, I could be consuming foreign goods or American goods, but we got consumption plus savings. All right, so those are some important formulas now to keep in the back of my mind. I'd say even just memorize them for the next test, and memorize them now so that when we get into a few more models in the upcoming chapters, you kind of have those right off the tip of your tongue. So this ends up changing our demand for goods and services through consumption, because if the government collects more money, if they raise tax rates, then I'm going to reduce my consumption. So that's going to cause me to have less disposable income, and I'm going to reduce consumption. By the way, I'm also going to reduce savings. I'm going to reduce them both if I'm doing some fraction. If I tend to spend 90% of my money and save 10% of my money, if I have less money, I'm going to do less of both, right? So that's our shifter. So let me write that out. I'm kind of running out of board there, so let me, well, I guess I can go right here. So let's go through the logic we just did. An increase in little t, an increase in the tax rate, leads to a decrease in consumption, which now is going to manifest itself in this model as a shift of the aggregate demand curve. So a decrease in consumption is going to lead to a decrease in aggregate demand. And that is a shift to the left of aggregate demand. Now that's where using this little helper up here comes in handy. A decrease in consumption, what happens for my shifter? Well, if this is going down, this is going down, right? So I kind of use that equation as a reminder of which direction the aggregate demand curve is shifting. So, if that was the only thing going on in the economy, real GDP going to go up or down? Down. Price level up or down? Down. So we go this way with it. Now, are there any long run effects to that? Are there any long run effects to that? Using this model, using just the curves that are up here, no. So now we're going to start to set the stage for some short run effects and long run effects on how things are going to adjust. Whatever the tax rates are, they're going to be, and we'll get into more complex ways to analyze that in future chapters. But for now, it's a shift to the left, and it's going to lead to a short run decrease in output and the price level. Okay, there's number one. Number two. We've got investment is next on our cigarette list. The key variable that we have for investment is profit expectations. Profit expectations, of course, if we're talking about profits, we're talking about profit expectations by business. Remember, we set the stage that businesses are the ones that are doing the majority of borrowing. So when we developed the loanable funds market, the demand for loanable funds was primarily businesses. They were the ones that kind of were the lion's share of the demander for loanable funds. When the government entered that market and drove interest rates up, that crowded out some of the private businesses. So we had that dynamic going on. But that's our businesses, and they're highly dependent upon profit expectations. Okay. So an increase in profit expectations. So in other words, the Wall Street Journal and business people around are just thinking, you know, I think 2013 is going to be a really good year, and they're just kind of thinking optimistically about the future. How does that affect their behavior today? Do they tend to increase I or decrease it? Increase, right? So they're going to tend to increase purchases of capital and equipment and inventory and all those things that come along with preparing for a good year. They're going to increase that, which then is an increase in aggregate demand. A shift to the right. Okay, so I'm just going to add as another note here on interest rates. We talked about that over here. An increase in interest rates leads to a decrease in investment. That was the crowding out effect, which of course would be a decrease in aggregate demand all by itself. Okay, number 3 is G, government spending. That's the G that I mentioned up here, and I kind of reluctantly put it up here, but I hope you see that we're defining what fiscal policy is here. That's not one of the shifters up here. It's a shifter down here. We're treating it separately. So you might note that this is the G of fiscal policy. So fiscal policy of a change in government spending. We're going to buy more weapons. We're going to change some programs around. Whatever it is, we're changing fiscal policy. And increase in government spending leads to an increase in aggregate demand. Again, just following our formula, which is helpful to come back to. It seems pretty easy. Increase in G increases aggregate demand. So we can kind of go back to that each time with these. Our last one is the rest of the world. So for the rest of the world, number 4, we've got net exports. From our cigarettes, it's always been X. Don't forget that the single big X here is equal to exports minus imports. What we sell to the rest of the world versus what we buy from the rest of the world. Net exports. Okay, so the shifter here comes about in a couple different ways. So we've got, let's call it shifter number 1. If there's an increase in foreigners' income, so they're experiencing economic growth. China's probably a prime example. Although there's a few question marks out on China now, but China's been experiencing real economic growth. So when foreigners, we use the star again for the foreign country, when real GDP for the rest of the world is tending to grow, what's the effect on our market? They're going to buy more from us. They're going to increase exports, right? Now these are U.S. exports. They're buying more stuff from us. So an increase in income from foreigners leads to an increase in our exports, which is really an increase in big X, which is an increase in aggregate demand for the United States, for the domestic country. What happens if the foreigners are experiencing inflation relative to us? So if the foreign price level is going up, are they going to tend to buy more or less American goods? More. So same chain of events here could cause aggregate demand to increase for the Americans if the foreign price level is going up. As I stated at the beginning, all of these arrows can be flipped the other way. A decrease in this leads to an increase in the other. Or in this case, they're both positively related. Okay.